Thank you. Is anybody?
That's Silly Walks, right?
Yes, Silly Walk from Monty Python. And they took one of John Cleese's poses from his Silly Walk and made a pedestrian sign out of it. John Cleese, after his tenure at Monty Python, he started getting into business pep talks. You can look up, yes, it's an actual sign in Montetoba Springs, Colorado, although I think there's not as many because legally they're not supposed to be. It's supposed to be a universal sign for pedestrians. So, but yeah, that's where I found it, was at Manitoba Springs in Colorado. It's a very artsy type town, kind of like Santa Cruz. But this is I use this kind of as a moniker to kind of talk about being delightfully irreverent toward yourself and toward your job. You have to be careful if you're going to be irreverent against other people or other people's jobs, because they may not know how to take it. Okay. Now, I don't want to sit here and yammer all evening, but you guys don't speak up. I guess you'll just have to listen to me. Now, what I'm trying to get at through this, now you have your job, what do you do to keep it? You've seen the signs that are for everything I needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten, like stand in line, play well with others, don't run with scissors, flush, take a shower, take a bath, personal hygiene. There's actually a book that somebody wrote, says everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. And he goes through some of these basic things about how we humans interact with each other. And we are quite complex. And our social organization, we have a tendency to want hierarchy. Okay. When you're learning the job, take lots of notes and ask lots of questions. That's for darn sure. Also, I would recommend, if you see magazines or books that your boss has read, you read them. So you have a commonality on what you're talking about. For example, when I was at Foster Farms, they went through this massive training campaign. Everybody got trained on the 7 habits of highly effective people, whether you wanted it or not. And I can't argue with most of it. A lot of it's common sense. But there was one attribute called sharpening the saw, which I thought was really cool, because it's the idea of saying, hey, I'm going to take some time, close my door, sharpen my saw, meaning I am going to study my skill set to get better. So when you actually allocated time on your calendar, sharpening the saw, you had better be reading a manual or learning how to add a compiler switch to your workflow or whatever. But the idea is that once everybody went through all the training, everybody got 7 habits training, everybody had the same vocabulary. That was helpful, because people actually they start to communicate better, because when you're in a discipline like computer science, you don't necessarily communicate too well to finance people or tax people or accounting people, because you don't know their glossary. And we talked about business rules and creating a common glossary. The 7 Habits created a common glossary about humans. And the other one is Who Moved My Cheese? And, there's some other silly, simple books that talk about business. A lot of it is just give people the benefit of the doubt. Okay. But as far as some of the ideas, now that you have your job, what do you do to keep it? One of the things that I've heard feedback from, I mean, these are old people, older than me, that were in positions of authority in all manners of businesses. Okay. And one of the terms that they would use is conscientiousness. Now that's a long word, lots of syllables, but in essence, it is, I'll look up the definition here and I've got it, I copied it here. The quality of wishing to do one's work well and thoroughly. Okay. His conscientiousness is second to none, and he regularly makes follow-up calls to ensure everything is going well. You can summarize this as you care about your craft. Okay. When I worked on photocopiers, I had a little motto I told all my fellow techs. A clean machine is a lean machine. And if you took your time to clean it right, you rarely got callbacks. And some of the techs I worked with got callbacks constantly because they would do a quick, sloppy job and it would hold together for 3 days. And they'd do another quick, sloppy job. And they were always busy. Well, I had just as big a territory as they did with just as many machines, but I was never that busy. I worked from 10 to 2 because I put my machines on a cycle and I spent my time on each machine doing it right. So I didn't have to do it again. That's conscientiousness. And you do that in software, you do it in hardware, do it in networking. You check and double check, and you do your own quality assurance. Here is a classic example of conscientiousness. You're writing an email, and you got to send it to everybody. How many of you slow down, stop, read it a second time or third time under your breath, kind of aloud to yourself before you send it? If you do that, you don't have the problems of, oh dear, how do I pull back an email to everybody when I said something I shouldn't have said? That's, the absence of conscientiousness. When you offend everybody in the organization by saying something off the cuff, okay? That happened here a couple of years ago. The director of IT basically insulted at a very personal level one of the faculty here. Oh boy, talk about, he didn't last too much long after that. He apologized, but the damage was done. It did not matter if it was true to him. It was the way it was perceived. This is another thing you want to put a note next to, is how do you control how people perceive you? about that for a second. I'm going to put that into chat if I can get it to work. So are you thinking about this a little bit and you trying to come up with some terms? Yeah. Yep. Yep. These are all really good points that you're bringing up. Be friendly. Be clean, as in your speech. I agree. Cordial. Common courtesy. Your tone. Yes, your tone speaks volumes.
Wouldn't your physical appearance matter too? Like how you dress at your work?
That depends on where you work and who you work with. I always took my time to dress business casual, at least, button-up shirts. I didn't always wear the best shoes, but I almost always wore shoes that had some sort of static protection. Due to what I was doing, and Dockers, khakis, nowadays, nice jeans are considered okay, but you dress kind of like your boss does. That's kind of the best way to do it, because if you take just a few minutes with your appearance, it means you care enough about your appearance that you care about what your job is. And, some people said a clean desk is a sign of a broken mind or whatever. I always found that I got better feedback from people when I kept things neat. I might have had several stacks of stuff. Each was a project, but I kept it neat. I worked with a fellow who was terrible at that. He had literally mounds of stuff in his office. It was like walking into a maze. And when he'd go on vacation, the secretary would come in, clean out his entire office, put it into banker's boxes, and put it in storage. He never, ever asks for anything out of those boxes. That was his habit. He was kind of a pack rat. He was just that on that thing. And let's go back to some of these. Control your input to them. I like that because what you're trying to do is you're not revealing too much about yourself, but because some people are toxic, and if they find out you have a weakness in your personal life, they will grind it to death. And those are the type of people you want to avoid. Okay. The servant's heart, I agree. The servant's heart, I like to describe that as, it's amazing how much work can get done if nobody cares who takes the credit. That's huge. If you work, like I was mentioning earlier, this hierarchical structure in human behavior, we have a tendency to like that hierarchical structure, because if you look at tribes, you look at religions, you look at our political structures, we're attracted to the strongman politics. And why is that? Well, because we think that they're strong, they know. It's like if somebody's rich, you think they know. It may or may not be true. It's just a bias that we have as humans that we don't often evaluate. Okay. Kindness and sympathy. And we're going to talk about this sympathy thing. This sympathy is a big one. Okay. And I like today when I'm getting my face chopped, I was at the doctor's office. And I try to get the people to talk about themselves by asking a silly question. I said, that is a really unique accent. Do you have a second language? And they said, yes. And I go, well, that's really cool. I taught a class one time that had 9 different languages in a class of 30. So we started talking about language. And I said, well, what is your second language? Or he said, well, it's my primary language. It's Greek. And I said, really fascinating. I love the Greek culture. We started talking about where to go in Greece. And oh my gosh, the guy, and I was his, best friend. But the thing is, it was I wasn't faking it. I was being honest. And then the nurse that was in there had been working for the guy for a while and never knew he spoke Greek. And I got her to talking, found out she was ex-military. And then I've learned over the years, when you meet people who are ex-military, you say, thank you for your service. Whether or not they saw action or not, who cares? They were in, your tax dollars are paying for their salary and they're defending the country at some level. And you'd be surprised how far please and thank you will take you. And it's really simple. And kindness is right in that category. And I'm just talking about the simple stuff here. This is the kind of stuff that makes people want to be around you and keep you on their employ. Okay? Because you may not agree with every decision, but you're not going to stand up in the middle of a meeting and call the boss out on it and embarrass him and everybody else in the room, even though what you say is absolutely rock solid true. It's how the truth is delivered that makes more sense. Truth delivered that way is like throwing a rock, okay? But truth, when it's delivered correctly, it kind of goes inside somebody's head and it kind of blossoms. And then they come up with this great idea, which is great. The idea is implemented. You don't have to worry about it, okay? But please and thank you. There's a, Sidney Poitier, the old actor who recently passed. I don't know if I mentioned this class, maybe I did, but there's a couple of interviews about him back in the 70s, because he was one of the guys that kind of broke the mold for Black actors in Hollywood. In the movie, the classic movie of Look Who's Coming to Dinner, about a Black and white couple coming to the white girl's parents' house, and very awkward evening for everybody, but it opened the dialogue in society to talk about these things, because we have biases that we don't even know we have. And let's talk about this perception thing. How can you control how people perceive you? That's a really loaded question that isn't one that has a specific answer.
I can imagine there are some people that you might be working with where most of your interactions with them would be, I need you to do this for me, and then you can pass it back. And that's probably all you want from an interaction with some employees. And in other cases, it might be a little bit more personal, and you may need to be more involved with them.
Totally agree. This is why task-based things like, here's our Kanban board and here's the things we need to get done. You take these, I'll take these, and we'll get them done. And when you're done, let's circle back and figure out where we're going. You keep things that are professional, simple, straightforward, and direct. way. You try to avoid ambiguity, but sometimes it's impossible. But this perception, how people control you, or how you control perceptions, is you really, one side of the equation is you can't, because people will approach you with their biases, whatever they happen to be. And the other thing is you can control it to some extent by the way you treat other people. This is one of those things that I've told my girls when they were growing up. I said, "Do you ever wish you had all the answers?" And I said, "No, never. All I want is a really good question." It's a lot more fun to discover a good question than it is to have all the answers. Like, why? You know, why is a really good one. It can keep you going for years. Now, so this is something that you might want to take note of, is that you are in a position of projecting who you are in a business situation, in a professional situation. How do you want people to perceive you? Do you want to stand up straight, be all slouchy, dress like a slob, pick your boogers and eat them? You know, it's like, how do you want to be perceived will also help, is like, be aware of how people may perceive you. You can't always control biases. Like, for example, I'm old in the world of tech. So what? I'm old. That means it would be very difficult for me to land a job in the Bay Area working with 20-somethings and 30-somethings. But there are ways to mitigate those types of biases by going to a career counselor. And here's some of the things they'll tell you. They tell you, like an old guy like me, they would tell me, dye your hair, bleach your teeth, tan up, buff up, pick up the vernacular of the younger crowd, and don't use things like Mary Poppins, which is an old movie from the 50s or 60s. Use a newer reference like Frozen. And so sometimes you have to play against those biases because people don't really know they have them. This is part of it. Okay. All right. Now, that's a question that just noodle on that. How do I want to be perceived? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, obviously, if I went and tried to tan up, buff up, bleach my hair, and do all that other stuff, I would come across as a Looney Tune. It's just that's just too far. I can't do that much. I can tell them I'm a yoga instructor and I can do a class. But in the that's something that you really can't control. You can only control your response. My nephew just finished up working at a camp for very troubled teenagers that are coming off drugs, this, that, and the other thing. And the way they do it is they go backpacking for 10, 15, 20 days at a stretch. And it's very uncomfortable for a lot of these kids because a lot of them come from extreme wealth and they've never gone without anything. But the book they ask each one of these teenagers to read is called Man's Search for Meaning. If you have not read it, by Viktor Frankl. Yep, that's very true. Yep, it makes this book, Man's Search for Meaning, is a short book. The first half is about Viktor Frankl's experience as a Jew in the concentration camps. And the second half of the book is about his approach to healing trauma. He called it logotherapy, logos. And you can take it or leave it from the clinical standpoint. But the big takeaway in his book is between stimulus and response, you have choice. This is also in the 7 habits. So when I saw that in the 7 habits, I'm thinking, can't be all bad. And they're quoting Viktor Frankl here. What does this mean? Somebody cuts you off on the freeway. Do you immediately flip them off? Or do you pause, think, well, maybe they're in a hurry. I'm not going to worry about it. You have a choice. You always have a choice how you respond. Oftentimes, we are in situations where we are automatic in how we respond, and we don't think about it, and we get angry at the drop of a hat, and something irritates us. That's just the way we are. Well, you still have choice. And I'm not going to sit here and get into the deep psychological things about this. But basically, I'll give you a real world experience. I was working on this computer system in Modesto, and this fellow had just dropped maybe 35 grand on a bunch of computers in the early 90s. Okay. A lot of money in the early 90s. And I come in to work on it, and he just starts laying into me. And I'm going, whoa, I wasn't expecting this today. So I just sat there for a minute. Well, stood there and deer in the headlights look. And I just happened to sit there and didn't really know what to do. But I was listening to what he was bitching about. And I said, you know, sir, you have every right to be pissed off. I would be too if I just plunked down as much money as you did and it doesn't work. Let's try to work on this. And I mean, instantly, he was in my corner helping me out. And he showed me what it wasn't doing. And it was just a stupid software setting that somebody forgot. We reset it and everything started working, i.e. he could print his 1099s and his W-2s, which was huge because the fees, if you can't get those printed, it gets expensive quickly. And he outsourced that kind of stuff in companies. But sometimes acknowledging somebody's behavior and saying, you're obviously upset. Okay. I'm not going to try to get upset back at you. All that does is escalate it. Now, what does that require on your part? How many of you can back down from an argument when you know you're going to, either you're going to win it or lose it? How many of you back down from arguments? Or are you always the one that always wins, always has the last word? Does that make you hard to work with? Does that make you hard to live with? I don't know. That's you. That's you. I don't know. I'm just speaking from what I've seen in business and what I've seen in the classroom too. Truly angry people don't get promoted. Truly angry people start their own companies and they're bearers to work for. They have a high turnover rate. They're not fun to work with. And they tell you to do something, you know it's not going to work. You go do it anyway, and it doesn't work, then it's your fault. Then you start updating your resume and you go look for another job. And I had one boss like that, and I put in my 2 weeks notice, and he fired me on the spot. Well, had I been older and wiser, I found out that that's illegal. You can't do that. I could have gotten 2 weeks pay. Yeah, for nothing, pay was terrible anyway. But one of the big things that brings to this discussion about perception is, what is the difference between sympathy and empathy? Okay. All right. Now, I am going to go into this for one and only one reason. David Needham, as in Needham Road here in Modesto. He is the CTO of Opportune, a micro-lending bank based in the Bay Area. They have an enclave of their DevOps people here in Modesto, making Bay Area salaries. It's a complete Amazon cloud play. They do everything in the Amazon cloud. They run big, monstrous databases. They spin up huge AI models, create a new model, spin it back down, reclaim the credits. He gave a talk in my final projects class, and I asked him, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? He said, I would work on my empathy sooner. Now, here's a guy who's got a full-blown house in San Francisco and multiple acres up the hill, Sonora way. The guy has got money, okay? But he's earned every darn dime of it, okay? Didn't come from money. He's hard worker. And when somebody like this, because he's very approachable, you would never expect him to be that way. And some of the people that have truly amazed me over the years are remarkably humble. And they're fun to talk to because they can explain extremely complex things simply. I'm sure you've all met somebody that can explain things in such a complicated way that nobody in the room understands it except them. Well, that's great. It makes them feel good, but nobody in the room understands it, okay? True genius is the ability to help other people understand where you're coming from. That's just empathy, okay? And I found this fun little YouTube video. I don't know if you've heard of Brene Brown, but she's kind of a business talker, life coach, one of those types of people that has good insights about things. She's written some good books. It's about basically a lot of these factors is humans want to be treated like humans. It's that simple. So how do you treat other people with respect and dignity without compromising your own set of values? Okay, it's not really that hard. Now I'm going to try to figure this out. Minimize this. And do this over here. Go to screen share. And then when I do screen share, I'm thinking the sound should come through. You'll have to let me know.
So what is empathy and why is it?
Can you hear that? Did that come through? Oh, good. All right. All right. This is actually 3 whole minutes. So it's actually pretty good. So I'm going to.
Very different than sympathy. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. Did that make sense? Did that kind of come? Whoa. Hold on. Wow, wow, wow. Now, that was a little video. You can just search on Brene Brown and empathy, sympathy, and you'll find a bunch of stuff. And it makes sense. It does make sense. And you don't have to be steeped in any particular religious tradition to see this. It's human. It's a human factor. When I was putting this together, the videos said things so much better than I did. But basically, sympathy involves understanding from your own perspective. My favorite dog died versus your loss of your only child. It's not the same. And when you try to do the sympathetic response, it oftentimes comes up as mixed, or the other person said, I wish they'd never said anything. Okay. Versus empathy is putting yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding why they may have these particular feelings. Like there's an old Indian saying, don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasin. In other words, wait till you live his life for a little while and then see if you say the same thing. This goes back to the biases that we all have that we don't even know we have, unless you evaluate them. But I've always been the one that says, oh, that was an awkward situation. What could I have done to make that a little bit better? It's the same thing when you're crafting code. Oh man, I forgot the semicolon on the terminating colon bracket in JavaScript. Again, how can I remember this? Make a sticky note, whatever. You work on it. You try to remember it so you don't do it again. And it's the same way with human behavior. Sometimes you just step in it and you get it, and you're up to your neck in it, and you go, I'm in deep here. I got myself in trouble. And you just have to write it out and say, okay, I'm not going to do that again. And you just kind of have to live with it. Okay. The part that fits into this, how people perceive you. What do you suppose would be the change in another's perception of you if you were truly empathetic versus sympathetic? So again, you can't necessarily control how people perceive you, but you can control how you perceive them. Does that make sense? Is it, if some people are hard to work with. I get that. Some people are impossible to work with. I get that too. And some people give you heartburn just thinking about them. You go, oh, I don't want to work with them. Then you just have to go through it. Okay. So in this area of your response to other people, your choice, this comes with a few things of listening and communication. Okay. Now here's what I've been noticing. I can go to any HR blog, and I'm on several HR lists via LinkedIn. And what are you looking for? What are you looking for? And it's always the top 4 or 5 soft skills, soft skills, soft skills, always, always, always soft skills. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, define them clearly. And you kind of get this vague, nebulous understanding of what soft skills are. And that's kind of in the area of teamwork, adaptability, problem solving, critical observation, not to tear down, but to find weakness and to make better, conflict resolution, leadership. And a lot of people say, oh, leadership. Oh, yeah. Big deal. I've got an MBA in leadership. Here's what I can tell you about leadership. If you're expected to lead a team, shut up. Listen to everybody. Pros and cons. You'll hear the heartbeat of the team. And that heartbeat is pointing in a direction. And you stand up and you point that same direction. And guess what? You're the greatest leader on the planet. Why? Because you're aligning everybody else to what they already want to do. Leadership isn't complicated. A lot of people like to make a lot of money on leadership scenarios. And yes, there are certain techniques based on your personality profiles of what kind of person you are, where you need to compensate more or less on your leadership style. For example, if you are not a naturally social outward person and you're in a leadership position, you're going to need more time alone to sharpen your saw so you can actually put out the energy it takes to be in front of people all the time. Other people thrive on that, and that feeds them. But just because that's their personality trait does not make them a good leader. Okay. And some people think the loudest voice is the best leader. I don't think so. the best leader is the one who can find what people want to do anyway and point them in that direction. And then it's just, everything falls into place. You kind of help people do what they already know they want to do. Okay.
First thing I think of is politics,
Oh,
where you can observe that a certain population
oh yeah.
wants something, and you can lead by
Oh yeah.
making sure that you're doing what they want.
Right.
It's an easy way to get elected.
Yeah, there is a really good quote, and I'll have to find it. I got it somewhere. It's in essence. Now you can take this from any political spectrum. Okay, you can take this from religion too. We all believe in nonsense at some level. We all believe in myth at some level. We all have a revisionist history of what we think of ourselves at some level. We are all flawed at some level. But this quote was from one of the influencers that basically said it's a lot easier to get people to believe in nonsense because now it's just emotion. And when you have this much emotion around nonsense, it becomes stronger than a uniform. And I thought that was pretty perceptive. Is that you can irrationally hold on to things and turn them into your clarion call that you're willing to die for. Now, I'm not quite that dedicated to any cause. One, I'm old. I've lived through a lot of it. That it's interesting to see how the politics has infiltrated every level of society. I've been going to yoga for years, and over the past year or 2 years, maybe longer than that, maybe 3 or 4 years, there's this natural division of what people believe in, red, blue. And you can just tell by the way people talk where their biases are and how they approach life. And if you know somebody's on one end of the spectrum and they don't agree with you, and you're not going to change their mind. Listen. Okay. And it's like my son-in-law, pretty red. And I had a chance to talk with him. And I said, yeah, I'll admit it. I'll give you a little of my political background. I was very red when I was in the private sector. Yeah, work your way up. Go for it. I just started teaching and I realized, some of these people really do need a safety net. Yeah, these single moms with 2 kids living out of their car, nobody around to help them. Yeah, and they're trying to go to school. Yeah, okay. Those types of things, you move, at least in my mind, at least for me, I moved a little more to the blue. I'm deeply purple. I'm very moderate. What do they call it? Fiscally liberal, socially liberal, fiscally conservative. Government should be any bigger than it has to be, but I don't think you can legislate morality. Enough said about my politics. It doesn't fit anywhere. It's not on the spectrum. So who cares? It doesn't matter. It's like, can't complain. Nobody's going to listen anyway. And nobody really cares. But let's talk about this communication and soft skills, soft skills, soft skills. I think what I've discovered in rereading some of these blogs is that when people ask, are you a good communicator? It's code for saying, do you actively listen? Now, what does actively listen mean? Well, let's paint an example. How many know anybody that talks so fast that they never seem to inhale. And they're on this stream of consciousness and they're just steamrolling you with all their words. And then when you do get a chance to ask the question, their brain is already answering the question you haven't even finished yet. And by the time you get 4 words said, they've answered the question they thought you were going to ask, and they just keep steamrolling right over you. So that's not listening. And we all know somebody like that. Okay, it's like customers, bosses, friends, sometimes it's your own family members, and you just have to wait for them to get tired before they listen. Once they're tired, okay, now we have some time to talk. But I was talking to my son-in-law. I won't say he grew up with wealth, but I will say he grew up in privilege. And I was mentioning some of the things that I mentioned in the classroom. And one of the things I like to mention when everybody's in the room, I said, some of you know what it's like to go hungry. Some of you don't. We're all coming from different backgrounds, and I want everybody to cut everybody else lots of slack in my classroom. Okay? And don't compare yourself. That's the fastest road to being depressed that I can think of. When you start comparing yourself to other people, don't do that. It's just not worth your emotional energy. Okay. But when I was talking to him, and I was trying to get him to acknowledge the view from another perspective, you can't tell people what to believe. You can't tell people. Some people love it that way. Tell me what to think and I will do it. I will think whatever it is you want me to do. Well, I'd rather be with people that question, because it actually brings things into focus better. You can actually, I don't agree with that, but you know what? It frames the debate. We're beginning to get the edges of what this debate is about. This is a good thing. So I let people have their say, and for the most part, I'm not going to change their mind. And I know, some people will never, ever change. But I can. So I'm going to choose to keep changing for the better. Whatever that means to anybody but me. So life is a process. And you live, hopefully you love, you laugh, you die. That's kind of the way of things. Think of all the billions of people that are already dead. How many do we remember? Well, most of us are in that category. Kind of defeatist. Well, it's not. It can be liberating. Because I don't care that I have this big old bandage on my face. I have a delightful, irreverent attitude towards myself and my job. And in general, my approach to life. I try to find the things that are happy and fun and amusing, because those are a lot easier to share with other people. Okay? Now, some of what I've been trying to get across here is, somebody mentioned this to me a long time ago in this category of conscientiousness. If you're truly conscientious about the people around you, you take time to acknowledge their humanity. And where I learned this from was from my father-in-law. He was a retired nuclear physicist. He worked on the bomb. And his conscientiousness was profound. when debates would happen and people would suck him into these argumentative debates, he would just simply say, could be. He did not say, that's right. He didn't disagree. He didn't agree. He just said, could be. And didn't challenge the person's opinion or their assumption, and just very graciously said, could be. And over time, the people just ran out of energy because they realized that he was going to say could be. But I found out after his death, when the Livermore Labs historians came through and looked through his effects, he was known as the man. And I said, what's that mean? Oh, that means that anybody in any discipline who had a problem and they couldn't figure it out, they went to talk to the man. That was my father-in-law. I never knew that. That's pretty amazing when somebody has that kind of a, what do you want to call it, legacy, and they're not standing on their own soapbox of their legacy. You can probably count the number of people like that in your life on the fingers of one hand. They are few and far between. But those are the types of people I prefer to emulate rather than some of the other things we see that grabs all the headlines.
That idea of saying could be, sometimes you can bring someone like away from their point of view by just giving them that opportunity that year to speak about what they mean. And sometimes just by trying to say it to another person, they'll realize kind of the flaws in what they're saying or what they believe.
Right. And if you're skilled at this, you ask the right questions.
You can draw it out.
Right. And you can say, so I really appreciate your view on the voting registration rights, but I have another question. Do you have any Black friends or ever have any Black friends? Do you know what poverty is like? You can't say that directly, but you can kind of lead to those types of questions, because we all live in a bubble and we rarely get out of our bubble. You know, somebody asked me, said, you know, what do you want with your life? I said, I live in a box. I know I live in a box. I know the edges of my box. I'm very happy with my box. But occasionally I want to open the door and look out. But unlike most people, I know I am in a box. I have biases. I have preconceived ideas. The point of getting other people to talk without them trying to convert you is an interesting line to walk. And I did that. I'll give you a real world example. I was a technical trainer and I was working in a company called Tab Products. And I had this student from Greece. And this fellow from Greece was a Muslim, very devout. He took time to do his 5 prayers, and I didn't have any problem with it when he was doing it, because it was a one-on-one training. So when he took his time to pray, I said, okay, I'll give you your time and I'll leave the room. And out of respect for your beliefs, I will sit quietly in another room and allow you to do your prayer. The first couple, 3-4 days were miserable. He tried so hard to convert me to Muslim. It was exhausting. But around day 4, because we were going to be together for 21 days, 3 weeks training, weekends. I gave him all kinds of things to do on weekends. And but anyway, by about midway through the first week, I sat down with him and said, okay, you're a very devout Muslim. I'm not. You're not going to convert me. But I do want to learn more about your religion. Tell me about Ramadan. Tell me about your rights. And tell me about Sharia law. Tell me about, can you eat kosher food if there's not halal food available? How does this work? What is your Sabbath? What are things that bring out reverence and awe for you? And I tell you what, from that point on, it was so much easier to work with him because I was learning a ton about the belief system. And I'll be honest, I've got a copy of the Quran. I don't know much about it, but learning from somebody who's truly devout and truly lives it, I can really see why it's one of the big religions in the world. Like any religion, it can be skewed by political power. But the premise of it is, love, acceptance, and forgiveness, like most of the rest of them. But it was really interesting that the way to diffuse it was to ask him to help my understanding of his belief system. He no longer tried to convert me. He basically educated me. And it's a far better approach to these sometimes touchy situations. And some people just don't want to be changed because they believe what they believe because there's a tribe to which they adhere to. But keeping this back into the business arena, I had a chance to do this with the Japanese fellows. I worked with some Japanese consultants pretty closely for almost a month. And I asked them about the Japanese culture and the language and all kinds of things. I learned all kinds of interesting things. And when you get people to open up about things that they share in common with other people of their tribe, whatever that is, ethnicity, religion, your beliefs that Chevy's better than Ford, I don't care what it is they open up a little bit and become more human. And I think this component is what you need to keep your job. Can I ask a loaded question? Has anybody ever heard anything like this in their way to get a job? And keep it is to be empathetic and human and say please and thank you. Anybody mention those things anywhere in your career or in your school career? I'm just curious. Some people don't want to say. Some people do. That's kind of what I thought. Not really. No. I can definitely tell you I didn't learn a lot of this stuff until in my late 50s. So call me a slow learner with a flat forehead as I keep hitting my head against the wall. Is that some of this stuff I really wish I had learned earlier. These human factors. But you don't have to give up your moral center or change your beliefs to communicate with people. It's knowing how to bridge the gap of these emotionally elated things. And I'll admit it, politics has become like sport. Yeah, I'm rooting for my team. Go, go, go. It's like, wait a minute. Is this really what it's supposed to be about? I go, oh boy. You know, I can sit here and chuckle about it because I'm at the back porch of my career. You guys are going to have to live with this. You're going to have to live with people that are fire and brimstone on either side of the spectrum. And, you know, this fanaticism has never gotten anybody anywhere. But the problem is, I made a correlation here. How many have watched Prisoner Show? Anybody watch Prisoner Show? Like, what's life like on the inside of prison? Look a few up. I'm going to challenge you in a non-confrontational way. Like the Orange is New Black, that's a little Hollywoodized. More like the documentaries of people who actually go inside. Oz, I think Oz is one of them, where they're actually in the prisons filming people. Okay. If you watch these, you notice that human behavior deteriorates to the base level of skin color. Everything else comes from that bigotry. It's sad to see our society devolve the same way. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule, and there's always things that do that. Say, well, that's not true. Well, that's fine. This is my observation. I would say all of tonight, and everything I say tonight is my opinion. This is not gospel. This is not, you can't take this to the bank and say, yeah, you're going to make money on it. It's my observation. But why does prison behavior devolve to skin color? I don't know the answer to that question, other than it's easy and it requires no thinking. And you can see that there are slices in the political spectrum, red, blue, green, purple, you name it, that have this same pattern of believing in a few absolutes, whether they be true or not, doesn't matter, but it creates a tribe. And being a part of a tribe is really, really important. Here's a book I am going to highly recommend you all read, called Story or Die. If you read this book and you grok it, you'll be able to survive in any workplace politic system. Okay. It's a phenomenal little book, short, it's fast. What I like about it is it brings out the humanity in story. And the premise of the book is we humans are tribal. Let's sit around the campfire and we're going to tell a story. Our subconscious is completely defenseless to a good story. How do you want people to perceive you? What story are you telling them? And what story are you telling yourself? Oh, I'm a bad person. I can't do anything right. I do this. You're so humble. You're dragging your body behind you. You're mentally beating yourself up all the time. That's not the right story. That won't get you anywhere. It's okay to give yourself a compliment when you do something well. You would not believe how many students I've said this to over the years, that it kind of knocks the wind out of their sails. You mean I can give myself a compliment on purpose and I don't need to get one from somebody else? I said, that's precisely what I'm saying. I've said this to a few students over the years, and one fellow just broke down and cried. And it's like he'd never received a compliment his entire growing up. Good job, son. He had never heard that. So when I said it to him, it was like, oh my God, I didn't say son. I said, you did a good job here. Why are you beating yourself up over it? Give yourself a compliment. He starts crying. It's the stories we tell ourselves. Where did you get your story? Evaluate it. Question it. Change it. Modify it. Tell yourself a true story of yourself, not one that you got your mind chatter going on 24/7. Okay. Yeah, gender norms. I get it. Yeah, I totally get this. The gender shades of gray. I totally get that. It's funny. You can a lot of now I'm getting I'm not to get preachy here, but a lot of religious responses are actually biology. And it's really spend as much time reading about weird stuff like this. You kind of see patterns, and it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. But gender norms are put out as survival of the tribe. You look at ancient cultures, there's roles to play. Ancient cultures also did not always have the men as the big, strong ones hunting. Some cultures, it was the women. Men did other things. Okay. It's very, you look at some of these ancient primitive cultures and you go, oh, this is really interesting. So it can be fun to see how some of this stuff, I get it. It's like the Chinese right now are doing a push to make their men more masculine. I'm going, what? Well, apparently the government thinks they're too many men are too effeminate. I go, what? What you mean the government is telling how men to be men now? What's it's like my brother has this joke about Oregon and says, yeah, where men are men and women are too. It's like, oh, geez, bro, that's gonna get you in trouble. But we have misconceptions about a lot of things. For example, I do yoga a couple times a week, and I'm almost always the only guy. Does that bother me? No. Should it? I don't know. Some guys wouldn't like it. I don't care. Like I was in a book club for 10 years. I was the only guy for 10 years. Yeah, we read a lot of chick flicks, but I don't care. My wife liked the books, and I needed to get out of my bits and bytes and ones and zeros world. So reading some chick flicks and some fiction kind of broke me out of my, got my brain thinking in some new, more creative paths. So it's okay to do things that are outside your comfort zone, because eventually they'll be your comfort zone. And then you can go try anything, and it won't matter whether you try or whether you succeed or not. You tried it, you experienced it. Like the movie Walk in the Woods with Robert Redford, and he couldn't find anybody to go on the Pacific Trail or the Appalachian Trail with him. So he finds this one old drunken buddy from college that goes with him. And at the end of the movie, the old drunken buddy basically kind of reforms himself, and he's, get clean. And he says, "We didn't hike the whole thing, but we hiked it. We did it." And give yourself a compliment. Go for it. Do it. Okay. Yeah, you have to switch it up. Make things interesting. If life's boring, whose fault is that? Only the boring get bored. I tell that to my grandkids. "Pops, what does that mean?" I said, "Well, if you're bored, that means you're not using your brain enough to go figure out something fun to do. Go figure it out." Will you play with me? In 20 minutes, go find something to do and we'll invent a game. You start it and we'll figure it out. And they come up with a game, 20 minutes. It's giving them a timeline for them to go be creative, so they know they don't have to do it for hours. It works. Okay. So I do want to give you an assignment for this. And I'm going to summarize what I want you to do in your own words. I want you to spend some time I'm going to put a few buzzwords here, and I'll read them to you so you know what's coming. So you can think about it. Between stimulus and response, you have choice. There was this is also very prevalent in the Eastern mindset, in the Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, all those isms, is between stimulus and response, you have a choice. There was this lay Buddhist minister who was in these terrible, terrible, terrible prison camps because he was Tibetan in China. And he had a chance to tell his story. And I was reading it in this book, and he basically said, yeah, it was hard there for a while. I almost lost compassion for my captors. He was beaten daily, starved, basically worked to death. By the time he was set free, he was like, skin and bones, barely alive. I couldn't say that, but that's a level of something that I don't think many people can attain. But I thought it was really interesting that he actually said this. I almost lost compassion for my captors. Wow. And these are people that are beating you regularly. How can you have compassion for somebody like that? I'd want to hit him back. Turn the other cheek, but I'm not a cheeks now. Yeah. So there's some elements in some of this stuff. Not to say we go attain that level of whatever it is you want to call it, perfection, Godism, Buddhism, enlightenment, whatever. But it's a target. It's something to head towards. working towards a target like that will make you a better person. And that's okay. Why not? I'd rather become a better person than a worse person. It's simple. Okay. Attitude of gratitude. Story or die. All right. Here's what I kind of want you to write about and think about. And I'm going to give you quite a bit of time to do this because some of you are just going to just spend 3 minutes on it and go away, and then you'll turn it in and I'll give you credit. That's fine. Okay. However, if you spend a little bit of time on this, it will make you more effective in the workplace. Why? Because you've learned some techniques on what listening is about. You can get to the core of the issue. Okay. All right. So here we go. Here's some topics you can play with. Is can you control how other people perceive you? Give me your opinion. What do you think the difference between empathy and sympathy is? Okay. Feel free to quote Brene Brown or go find other references. Between stimulus and response, you have choice. Give me an example. And then the book, Story or Die, you can go read about it. I'll find the author. And just there's one, and I'll include, I think there's a video reference to it. Story or Die video. Yes, I can remember now. Hold on. Story or Die video. Yeah, I can't, it's not going to be perfect, but it's close. I'll have to go find it. All right. Yeah, so I'll have to go look that up. But there is a scenario in the book that brings out this topic very, the stories we tell ourselves are sometimes flawed. And in this video, once I find it, we'll be able to explain it. Okay, that's all I had for this evening. So I think what I'd like to have you do is with these different topics, like how people can perceive you, empathy, sympathy, stimulus response, story or die, is try to synthesize them. How can you use some of these things that we talked about to make your work life or your future work life better? Can you picture yourself being the person that you want to work with? Can you picture yourself being the person that everybody wants to work with? Why? How? Simple questions, kind of forces a little bit of self evaluation, which is fine. But I'm finding, now I'll give you the impetus of why I talked about this particular topic tonight. We are going to have a retreat for the behavior BBSS department. And one of the topics is how our students have changed. This is an interesting topic because what I hear from many of my students is pure, unmitigated trauma and pain. Family members dying, brothers and sisters dying, grandmas and grandpas dying, losing jobs, having to live out of a car. I didn't hear much of that pre-COVID. Okay. It was more about content delivery. Now I'm spending, I won't say more time, but I am more aware of how hurt. And because people want to make a connection, but you can't. So how do you make a connection? A human connection, an honest, authentic human connection when there's no humans around. Zoom doesn't cut it. It's a stopgap. Okay. But anyway, that's one of the reasons I want to talk a little bit about this, is that in this 2 years of COVID lifestyle, most of you have been living in a rather insular world. I know I have. That's not reality. You're rubbing shoulders with humans for the most part of all of the history of humanity. Okay. Now, all of a sudden, we have to live in our own bubble. Of course, we're going to get subjected to an echo chamber. It's where we feel like we can belong. It's easy to fall into echo chambers. There's other people that sound just like you. It's good. It's bad. But it's disconnected from the rest of the humanness that makes us human. Okay? And don't kid yourself. Technology is a human job. It is. Well, I want to be a programmer and work in the computer room and do that. Nope. Those days are long gone. Rarely do you find somebody that codes and just lives off the grid and that's all they do. There's a few. I like 30 or 40 on the planet maybe, but there's not that many. In the high paying jobs and the jobs is where you work well together. Many brains solve complex problems. It's not the one lone ranger anymore. Okay. Now I have I'll stop here. I'll mention one little thing that I had fun with. I actually kind of used this little technique, this idea on a friend of mine at Foster, and he wanted to be a manager. Really? That's cool. I'm glad you want to be a manager. How do you manage yourself? Well, he was always a last minute person, always came in late, always did sloppy work, always did procrastinating. A title to manager isn't going to change that. So guess what kind of manager he's going to be? The kind I don't want to work for. You get that from his, don't take this personally, but I don't think I want you to be my manager. He changed his mind eventually. He saw that it was more of a political position, not a technical position. And he's, nah, I don't want that. So, but it was interesting. So when you become a manager, and that'll be an option for a lot of you, is it just amplifies who you already are. Are you happy-go-lucky or are you angry and bitter? It amplifies who you are. Okay. All right. On that note, I would like to hear some of what you folks have taken in tonight. I noticed some people have been popping in, popping out based on work or whatever. But give me, in the chat or verbal, knowing that you haven't heard this before, probably will never hear it again. What are you going to do with it? Apply it. That's good. And then the good question is, control what you can, roll with what you can't. That's very true. Yeah, it's like, don't sweat the small stuff. Well, the reality is it's all small stuff. That thing it is, just don't sweat. Yes, that's a very, very powerful insight. Your thoughts can affect other people. Yep, sympathy, empathy. Yep. Be more patient. Yeah, kindness doesn't cost anything. You know, I'd like to make people smile. It's fun. Yep. Handling emotional situations is hard, especially if you come from a family like I did, where there was never any emotional bandwidth, yelling all the time. Nobody put a pause to cause or cause to pause. That yell. I guess I could use this analogy. When you're in a tough spot, and, life is hard. Pretend you're a lamppost, and your brain or your consciousness is a lamppost, looking back at your body and your mind chatter spinning 500 miles a minute. What would that lamppost tell you? Depends on the situation, whatever. But it's the idea of get outside your own head. Stop the mind chatter and try to find out where all that's coming from. That's hard to do. Good thoughts, folks. Yeah, trust me, if you can control that inner mind chatter, the world opens up in ways you just cannot believe. I've been working on it for decades. They call it mindfulness-based stress reduction, AE, mindfulness. Mindfulness, thinking, being aware that your thoughts, a quick way to put this is your body digests food, but are you your digestion? No, it's part of me, but it isn't me. Your body makes red blood cells, but are you your red blood cells? No, not really. Your body breathes. Are you your breath? Well, it comes in and comes out, but I'm not my breath per se. Here's the tough one. Your thoughts. That's what your brain does. So are you your thoughts? In the West, we say yes. In the East, they say no. We are the observer of our thoughts. Now, think about that for a minute. Your brain crashes, burns, reboot. I get it. It's sometimes hard to think of these things. The end point of this is just calming down this mind chatter so you can actually be aware of what's around you. It's that simple. Hard. But that's the point, is you just become aware of what's around you. When you're so wrapped up in your own thoughts, you don't notice that the person next to you is almost on the verge of tears. Okay? That's really what it's about. Syntax error. That's perfect. No, I would not be willing to die for VI. I know how to use manual. All right, folks. I had fun tonight, but I have to acknowledge that this is not something you probably wanted to hear on a Tuesday night in the middle of final projects class. But based on my informal survey of post-COVID student condition, is these human factors are needed even more than they were pre-COVID. Just observation on my part. Okay. Looking forward to see what you folks write about this. So I'll post it and then record the video. And I should put a bunch of disclaimers in the video. This is not 100% true. I know I preach falsehoods by accident. We all think we know until we don't know. And then you go, oops, I goofed there. So on that note, I will hit pause. And then next week, I will probably have something pre-recorded for you, and then we'll go from there. I'm still lining up my guest speakers. We should get a couple at least this semester. You think it'd be easier in Zoom world? It's sometimes harder. Okay. The assignments post on, yeah, this assignment I will get to tonight and post it and get it going, and the recording I'll get once it finishes rendering, and I will put it in the same place, you know, the tab that says the less ongoing notes and videos. That's where to be. Okay. So, all righty, folks. I will stop recording, even though we're done a little